I tried to toast my wife at her birthday. My feminist granddaughter said, "Stop making this about you." I was already standing when she said it. The room was warm, filled with the soft glow of yellow lights and the low murmur of family voices overlapping each other. The cake had just been cut, plates passed around, forks clinking gently against porcelain. My wife sat at the head of the table, smiling in that quiet, patient way she has perfected over the years, the smile of someone who is used to letting others speak before she does. I held my glass slightly raised, my fingers wrapped around the stem, waiting for the room to settle. I didn't plan anything elaborate. No jokes. No stories meant to impress. Just a few words. A simple toast. A public thank you to the woman who had carried our family through more years than most people in that room had been alive. "I just want to say something," I began. That's when my granddaughter's voice cut through the air. "Can you not?" The words were sharp, impatient, loud enough to silence the table instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone coughed awkwardly. I felt every eye turn toward me, then toward her. I turned my head slowly, unsure I'd heard her correctly. "What?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression tight with irritation rather than surprise. "This is Grandma's birthday," she said. "Stop making this about you." The sentence landed hard. My wife's smile faltered. Not completely, just enough for me to notice. She glanced at my granddaughter, then at me, confusion flickering across her face, as if she were trying to understand how a moment meant to celebrate her had turned into something tense and exposed. "I wasn't," I started. "You always do this," my granddaughter continued, her voice steady now, confident, as if she were correcting something that had been wrong for a long time. "Men turning women's moments into speeches about themselves. It's exhausting." The word men hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. I lowered my glass slightly, my hand no longer steady. Around the table, people avoided eye contact. My son stared down at his plate. My daughter shifted uncomfortably in her chair. No one intervened. No one asked what I was trying to say. The moment wasn't curious. It was judgmental. "I just wanted to thank her," I said quietly. "It's her birthday." "And yet you're the one standing," my granddaughter replied, "holding the glass. Center stage." My wife finally spoke, her voice soft but strained. "I don't mind." But my granddaughter cut her off too. "That's not the point," she said. "This kind of thing normalizes men taking up space, even when the attention should be on women." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger at first, but disbelief. I had stood up to speak about my wife, not myself. To acknowledge her in front of the family. To give her words I often give her privately, but thought she deserved to hear out loud. Now those words were trapped behind my teeth, recast as evidence of ego. "I've been married to her for 43 years, I said, my voice lower now. "I think I'm allowed to say a few words." My granddaughter shook her head. "That doesn't give you a free pass." Free pass. The phrase stung. I looked at my wife again. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She looked embarrassed, not by me, but by the scene unfolding around her. A celebration had turned into a confrontation, and she was sitting at the center of it, unheard. I slowly set my glass down on the table. The clink it made sounded louder than it should have. "I didn't mean to take anything away from you," I said to her. "I know," she replied softly, but her voice was barely audible now, swallowed by the discomfort filling the room. Someone tried to change the subject. Another relative forced a laugh. The party resumed in fragments, But the warmth was gone. What should have been a moment of appreciation had been reframed as self-indulgence, and everyone felt it, even if no one wanted to admit it. I sat back down, my chair scraping quietly against the floor. As I picked at a slice of cake I no longer tasted, one thought repeated itself in my mind, heavier with each passing second. If publicly honoring your wife is now seen as stealing attention, when did gratitude start looking like selfishness? The room never fully recovered after that. People tried. I could see it in the forced smiles, the exaggerated laughter that followed a few seconds too late, the way conversations restarted without any real direction. Someone commented on the cake. Someone else asked about work. Ordinary words were thrown into the space like furniture hastily pushed in front of a crack in the wall. But the crack was still there. My wife sat quietly beside me, her fork resting untouched on the edge of her plate. She nodded politely when someone spoke to her, smiled when expected, but something in her posture had changed. She was smaller now, not in presence, but in permission, as if the moment had taught her that even being celebrated required restraint. That realization hurt more than the interruption itself. Across the table, my granddaughter looked calm, not triumphant, not angry, calm in the way someone looks after saying something they believe needed to be said. She scrolled briefly on her phone, then set it down, as if the matter were settled. I watched her and felt a strange mix of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Confusion, disappointment, and a quiet sense of displacement. I had expected disagreement someday. Generations always clash. But I hadn't expected correction. Not like that. Not publicly. Not framed as a moral failure instead of a misunderstanding. "You okay?" my wife whispered, leaning slightly toward me. "Yes," I lied. She squeezed my hand gently under the table, the way she does when words feel too heavy to be useful. That touch grounded me, reminded me that whatever had just happened didn't define us, even if it had redefined the room. A few minutes later, my daughter tried to smooth things over. "Well," she said too brightly, raising her own glass, "let's all just say happy birthday again." People echoed it half-heartedly. Glasses clinked. The moment passed, technically, but something essential had been lost. No one asked what I had wanted to say. No one asked how my wife felt. No one questioned whether the accusation fit the reality in front of them. Silence had taken sides. I realized then how quickly intention becomes irrelevant once a label is applied. Once you're accused of centering yourself, every movement afterward looks like confirmation. Sitting quietly doesn't restore innocence. It only validates the judgment. I felt trapped in a role I never auditioned for. As the evening wore on, I found myself watching instead of participating. Watching my wife laugh softly at something someone said. Watching my granddaughter engage confidently with relatives, articulate and assured. Watching the family operate around an invisible boundary that hadn't existed before. And the strangest part was this. I wasn't angry at her. I was grieving. Grieving the assumption that love would be interpreted generously inside a family. Grieving the idea that a lifetime of shared history could be overridden by a single narrative applied from the outside. Grieving the realization that even admiration, when expressed by the wrong person, could be reframed as ego. Later, when guests began to leave, my wife stood to thank everyone for coming. Her voice was warm, sincere, and careful. Too careful. She didn't mention the toast. She didn't look at me. She simply did what she's always done, carried the moment forward so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. That's when it truly hit me. The person whose birthday it was had been the most considerate one in the room. and the person accused of making it about himself was the only one who hadn't spoken since. As I helped clear plates in silence, one thought settled deep in my chest, heavy and unresolved. If even gratitude must now pass an ideological filter before it's allowed to be spoken, how many people are learning to stay quiet when they should be allowed to be sincere? That night, after the last guest had left and the house finally grew quiet, the weight of what happened began to settle in a different way. Not sharply, not angrily, slowly. My wife moved through the kitchen, rinsing glasses, stacking plates, doing the familiar motions that come after a family gathering. I offered to help, but she shook her head gently. "Sit," she said. "I've got this." I sat at the table where, just an hour earlier, I had stood with a raised glass and a full heart. Now the table was bare except for a few crumbs and the faint scent of cake lingering in the air. It felt symbolic in a way I couldn't ignore. When she finally joined me, she sat across from me, folding her hands together the way she does when she's choosing her words carefully. "You know," she said softly, "I was actually looking forward to what you were going to say." That sentence hit me harder than anything my granddaughter had said. "I didn't want it to be a big thing," I replied. "I just wanted you to know, publicly, that I see you." She smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "I know." We sat there for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. "I don't feel like you made it about yourself," she continued. "I never have." "I'm glad," I said. But tonight, it felt like I wasn't allowed to speak at all. She nodded slowly. "That's what bothered me too." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "I've thanked you privately 1,000 times. I just thought, on your birthday, in front of the family, it might matter." "It did," she said. "Even unfinished." That word stayed with me. Unfinished. I realized then that the toast wasn't interrupted because it was inappropriate. It was interrupted because it didn't fit into a framework that sees older men as suspect by default. In that framework, admiration is ego. Gratitude is control. Speaking is taking space. There is no room for nuance there. "I don't recognize the rules anymore," I admitted. "I don't know when speaking is allowed and when it's considered selfish." My wife reached across the table and took my hand. "The rules keep changing. Our marriage hasn't." That grounded me. I thought about all the things she's done over the years that no one applauded. The nights she stayed up worrying when the kids were sick. The way she held our family together during financial uncertainty. The sacrifices she made quietly, without announcements or recognition. My toast wasn't meant to elevate me. It was meant to finally elevate her. And somehow, that intention had been erased. "I keep thinking about her words," I said. "Stop making this about you." My wife sighed. "She doesn't see our history. She sees a pattern she's been taught to look for. And in that pattern," I said, "I don't get to be an individual." She squeezed my hand. "Neither do I." That surprised me. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She spoke for me," my wife said. "She decided how I should feel. She decided what the moment meant. And I wasn't asked once." That realization deepened the ache in my chest. The irony was painful. In trying to defend women, my granddaughter had silenced one. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. My wife already understood it. That night, lying in bed beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, I stared into the darkness and thought about how easily families inherit conflicts they never intended to create. I had raised my children to speak up, to question, to care. Somewhere along the way, speaking up had replaced listening. and caring had turned into correcting. As sleep finally began to pull me under, one question lingered in my mind, unresolved and heavy. If celebrating the person you love most can be framed as selfishness, what kind of love is considered acceptable anymore? The next morning, the house felt quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that follows a good night's rest, but the careful kind. The kind that comes after something has shifted and no one wants to disturb it too soon. Sunlight crept through the kitchen window, landing softly on the table where I had stood with a glass in my hand the night before. The image returned to me uninvited, vivid and uncomfortable. I watched my wife prepare breakfast, her movements unhurried, practiced. She didn't look upset. That almost made it worse. She had always been good at absorbing discomfort, so others wouldn't have to. That thought stayed with me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down, the warmth of the mug grounding me as my mind wandered back through the years, back to who we were before words like centering and taking up space ever entered our family conversations. When we were younger, we celebrated each other loudly. Birthdays were excuses to embarrass one another with stories, to express affection without fear of being misread. I had praised her openly then too. No one accused me of stealing attention. No one suggested I was making myself the focus by acknowledging her. So what had changed? It wasn't us. It was the lens through which everything was now viewed. I thought about my granddaughter, intelligent, articulate, deeply convinced she was protecting something important. I didn't doubt her sincerity. What troubled me was how easily sincerity had turned into accusation, and how quickly intention had been dismissed as irrelevant. She hadn't asked why I stood up. She hadn't asked what I planned to say. She hadn't asked how her grandmother felt. She had decided, and that decision had been final. I realized then that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was just the first time it had been impossible to ignore. There had been other moments, comments at the table, interruptions framed as corrections, subtle eye rolls when I spoke about the past. I had brushed them off, telling myself it was just generational difference. Now I wasn't so sure. Difference I could accept. Erasure was harder. My wife set a plate in front of me and sat down across from me. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the normalcy of the routine almost surreal after the night before. "Do you regret standing up?" she asked suddenly. I looked at her. "No." "Do you regret being the reason I stood up?" She smiled faintly. "Never." That answer steadied me. "I just don't understand when appreciation became a threat," I said. "When gratitude started being treated like ego." She nodded. "I think some people hear a man speak and assume he's speaking for himself, even when he's speaking about someone else. That was it. The assumption. Once it's made, everything else bends to fit it." "I keep thinking about her words," I admitted. How certain she was. How confident. "Certainty can be comforting," my wife said, "especially when the world feels confusing." I understood that. I really did. I remembered being young and believing that clarity meant correctness, that if something felt morally solid, it must be right. Age had taught me otherwise. Clarity without curiosity is dangerous. I wasn't angry at my granddaughter. I was worried about her, about the weight of always needing to call something out, about the exhaustion of never allowing a moment to simply exist without analysis. And I was worried about us, about how many more moments might be quietly altered if we didn't draw some kind of line. Not a loud one, a human one. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "We should talk about last night." I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it. To let time do what it always does, soften edges, blur details. But I knew that if I stayed silent now, the narrative would settle without me. And silence, in moments like this, doesn't create peace. It creates permission. Yes, I finally typed. We should. When I put the phone down, I felt something shift inside me. Not resolve born of anger. Resolve born of clarity. I wasn't going to argue with ideology. I was going to speak as a husband, as a grandfather, as a man who had earned the right to express gratitude without being accused of self-interest. And whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would not apologize for honoring the woman who had shared her life with me, even if the world no longer knew how to tell the difference between love and ego. We met 2 days later, not at our house and not at hers, but at a small cafe halfway between our worlds. It felt intentional. Neutral ground. A place where no one had authority simply by owning the space. My granddaughter arrived first. I could tell by the way she sat, back straight, hands folded around her cup, eyes alert. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive either. She looked prepared, as if she had organized her thoughts into clean categories and was ready to present them. I sat across from her and noticed how young she still looked in moments like this. Not immature, young. Carrying convictions that felt heavy for someone who hadn't yet lived long enough to see how often certainty breaks down under real life. I want to explain why I said what I said, she began, without waiting. I nodded. Go ahead. When you stood up with the glass, she said, it felt like you were positioning yourself as the voice of the room. Like her birthday became a platform for you. I listened. I really did. Not to rebut, but to understand where the conclusion came from. I didn't intend to do that, I replied calmly, but I understand that's how it looked to you. She seemed relieved by that. Exactly. Impact matters more than intent. I paused before responding. That sentence keeps coming up, I said, and I think that's where we're missing each other. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean that impact doesn't exist in a vacuum, I said. It happens to someone. And in this case, the person it happened to was your grandmother. She shifted in her chair. I know she didn't feel offended. Then who was harmed? I asked gently. She hesitated. Just for a second. It reinforces a pattern, she said. Men speaking over women. Men centering themselves. I wasn't speaking over her, I said. I was speaking about her. For her. With love. That still puts you in control of the narrative, she replied. I took a slow breath. Do you believe your grandmother has no agency in our marriage? Her eyes widened slightly. That's not what I said. But it's what your reaction implies, I replied. You assumed she was being overshadowed. You assumed she needed protecting. You assumed she couldn't welcome that moment for herself. She looked down at her cup. For 43 years, I continued, we've shared a life built on mutual choice. She didn't need me to defend her that night. She didn't need you to defend her either. What she needed was to be asked. Silence settled between us. I wasn't trying to erase her, my granddaughter said quietly. I know, I replied. But intention doesn't erase impact. The words landed differently when spoken back to her. She looked up at me, recognition flickering across her face. I didn't think about it that way, she admitted. That's what worries me, I said. Not your values. Your speed. She blinked. My speed. Yes, I said. How quickly you moved from discomfort to accusation. How fast you decided what that moment meant without letting anyone inside it speak. She leaned back, absorbing that. I don't want to silence women, she said. And I don't want to be silenced for appreciating one, I replied. We sat there for a long time after that, neither of us rushing to fill the space. For the first time since the birthday, the conversation wasn't about ideology. It was about responsibility, not just for what we say, but for who we speak over while saying it. When we stood to leave, she looked at me differently. I still believe men need to be careful about taking space, she said. I agree, I answered. And I believe people need to be careful about taking moments away from others in the name of protecting them. She nodded slowly. We didn't resolve everything that day, but we stopped talking past each other. And sometimes, that's the first real step forward. After that conversation, something subtle but undeniable shifted between us. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't reconciliation. It was restraint. We stopped trying to win. And for the first time, that created space for something more honest to exist. In the days that followed, I replayed the cafe conversation in my mind, not to sharpen arguments, but to examine my own reactions. I realized how close I had come to doing what many people my age end up doing when confronted with aggressive certainty, retreating into silence. Not the thoughtful kind of silence, the shrinking kind, the kind where you start editing yourself before you speak, where you second-guess gestures that once felt natural, where gratitude becomes internal instead of expressed, simply to avoid being misunderstood. That realization frightened me more than the interruption at the birthday, because once you start silencing yourself inside your own family, something essential has already been lost. My wife noticed it too. One evening, as we sat together watching television, she reached for the remote and accidentally dropped it. Instinctively, I leaned forward to pick it up for her. I hesitated for half a second, long enough to notice. She noticed too. She looked at me, not angry, not accusing, just observant. "Don't stop," she said quietly. "Stop what?" I asked. "Being you," she replied. That simple sentence cut through every doubt that had been accumulating in my chest. I wasn't imagining the cost of that hesitation. It was real, and it had nothing to do with ideology. It had everything to do with intimacy. When affection becomes conditional, it stops being affection. It becomes performance management. I thought about how easily that had almost happened to us. Not because my granddaughter wanted to harm our relationship, but because her worldview had trained her to distrust expressions that didn't fit her moral map. And that map, however well-intentioned, left very little room for lived history. At the next family gathering, I decided something. I would not provoke. I would not perform. But I would not disappear. When my wife entered the room, I stood. When she spoke, I listened. When she laughed, I smiled. I didn't raise a glass. I didn't make speeches. But I didn't diminish myself either. My granddaughter was there, watching, quiet. At one point, my wife leaned toward me and whispered something only I could hear. I responded the way I always have, with a soft comment, a familiar tone, the shared language of two people who have built a life together. Nothing dramatic happened, and that, I realized, was progress. Later that evening, my granddaughter approached me while others were distracted. "I've been thinking about something you said," she told me. I waited. "You said I moved too fast," she continued. "From discomfort to accusation." "Yes," I said. "I do that a lot," she admitted, "because I'm afraid that if I don't speak immediately, I'll miss the chance to stop something harmful. And sometimes," I replied gently, In trying to stop harm, you create it. She nodded. Not defensively. Not dramatically. Just honestly. I don't know how to slow down yet, she said. That's okay, I told her. Just don't speed past the people you claim to care about. She looked at me for a long moment, then said something that surprised me. I don't want Grandma to feel invisible. Then the best thing you can do, I replied, is let her speak for herself. That conversation didn't erase what had happened, but it reframed it. And reframing, I've learned, is often more powerful than apology. That night, as my wife and I drove home, she rested her hand on mine. You didn't disappear, she said. No, I replied. I almost did. She squeezed my hand gently. I'm glad you didn't. So was I. Because I was beginning to understand something clearly now. The danger wasn't disagreement. The danger was allowing someone else's certainty to make me doubt my right to express gratitude, admiration, and love, especially toward the woman who had earned it every single day of our shared life. And I wasn't willing to let that happen. Not quietly. Not politely. Not ever. Time didn't rush in to fix anything after that. It moved slowly, the way it always does when people are forced to sit with their own thoughts instead of performing them. Days passed. Then weeks. Family messages continued as usual. Birthdays, schedules, small updates, but the tone had shifted. Less edge. Fewer declarations. More pauses. I noticed those pauses. They mattered. I noticed them in my granddaughter's silence when conversations drifted toward topics she normally would have seized as an opportunity to correct. I noticed them in the way she watched before reacting, as if something inside her had learned to hesitate, not from fear, but from consideration. And I noticed something else too. I had stopped rehearsing. I no longer practiced explanations in my head before speaking. I no longer anticipated accusation every time I opened my mouth. The tension I hadn't realized I was carrying began to loosen, replaced by something steadier, a quiet confidence rooted not in being right, but in being grounded. That confidence came from my wife. One evening, as we sat together on the back porch, the sun dipping low and painting the sky in soft orange and blue, she leaned her head against my shoulder. You know, she said, that toast mattered to me. I turned toward her. Even though it never happened, she smiled. Especially because it didn't. I waited. It told me you wanted to honor me in front of everyone, she continued. Not privately, not quietly, but openly. And I don't need that every day, but it mattered that night. I swallowed hard. Being interrupted didn't take that away, she added, but it did show me how easily moments like that can be stolen. That word again. Stolen. It settled something deep inside me. I realized that what I had been protecting wasn't my pride. It was our shared space, the small, intimate territory where meaning is created between two people over time. When someone storms into that space with a ready-made narrative, they don't just interrupt a moment. They overwrite it. And overwriting lived experience with theory is one of the quietest forms of violence there is. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. My wife understood exactly what I meant. At the next family gathering, I saw the shift clearly. We were all in the living room, conversation flowing easily, when someone jokingly suggested I make a speech this time. A harmless comment. A laugh. I smiled and waved it off. Not tonight, I said. My granddaughter looked at me then, not sharply, not challengingly, but with curiosity. Later, when the room had thinned out and people were distracted, she came to sit beside me. I noticed you didn't stand up, she said. Yes, I replied. Was that because of me? She asked. I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "It was because the moment didn't belong to me to take." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense." There was no accusation in her voice. No defensiveness. Just reflection. "And," I added, "if it ever does belong to me again, I won't apologize for it." She looked at me, surprised, then thoughtful. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm starting to understand the difference between taking space and being given space." That sentence stayed with me, because it meant she was learning something most people never stop long enough to learn. That space is not seized by volume or posture, but granted through relationship, consent, and history. She wasn't there yet. Neither was I. But we were closer. That night, as my wife and I prepared to leave, she adjusted her coat, and without thinking, I reached to help straighten the collar. She smiled at me, not publicly, not dramatically, just enough for me to see. Across the room, my granddaughter saw it too. She didn't flinch. She didn't comment. She didn't turn it into a lesson. She let it exist. And in that quiet permission, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the birthday. Relief. Not because conflict was over, but because humanity had re-entered the room. I understood then that this wasn't about winning an argument or defending tradition. It was about slowing down long enough to let people speak for themselves, to let affection belong to those who share it, and to resist the urge to flatten complex lives into simple judgments. And if my granddaughter was learning that, even imperfectly, then maybe that interrupted toast had done something after all. Not what I intended, but something meaningful. Something that might last. What surprised me most in the weeks that followed was not what changed between my granddaughter and me, but what changed inside me. I realized how easily I had accepted the idea that my voice needed permission, not from society at large, but from my own family. I had never thought of myself as someone who shrinks. I've lived too long, worked too hard, loved too deeply to disappear quietly. And yet, for a brief moment, I almost did. That awareness stayed with me. I began paying attention to the way older people like me navigate rooms now. How we wait for cues before speaking. How we soften our stories so they don't sound like claims. How we turn gratitude inward instead of outward, just to avoid being misunderstood. It wasn't humility. It was caution. And caution, when it replaces sincerity, leaves very little behind. One afternoon, my wife and I were invited to a small gathering at a cousin's house. Nothing formal. No speeches planned. Just food, conversation, and familiar faces. The kind of setting where moments happen naturally, without announcement. At one point, someone asked my wife how she was feeling about turning another year older. She laughed and waved the question away, joking as she always does. I watched her, noticed the way she deflected attention even when it was offered kindly. That's when it hit me. She had learned to step aside long before my granddaughter ever spoke up. She had been making herself smaller for years, not because anyone demanded it outright, but because it kept things smooth, because it kept people comfortable. I stood up then, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. "I want to say something," I said calmly. The room went quiet. I felt my granddaughter's eyes on me immediately. Not sharp, not tense, curious. "This isn't a speech," I continued. "Just a sentence." I turned toward my wife. "You've spent your life making room for everyone else," I said. "Tonight, I just want to thank you for that, and remind you that you don't have to." Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. No one interrupted. No one corrected. No one accused me of centering myself. The moment passed the way moments should pass. Warmly, briefly, honestly. A few people smiled. Someone clapped lightly. My wife reached for my hand and squeezed it. And that was it. Later, as we sat in the car, my granddaughter broke the silence. "You didn't make it about you," she said. I glanced at her. "No. You made it about her," she added. "Yes," I replied. She nodded slowly, as if cataloguing the difference. "I think I understand now why the birthday hurt you," she said. "Not because you were stopped, but because what you wanted to say mattered." I felt a quiet relief settle in my chest. "That's all it ever was," I told her. She didn't apologize. She didn't need to. What she offered instead was something rarer: recognition. "I still think people should be careful with public gestures," she said. "But I don't think caution should erase gratitude." "That's a fair place to land," I replied. For the first time, I believed her. That evening, lying in bed beside my wife, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how close we come, sometimes, to misunderstanding each other forever. Not because we disagree, but because we refuse to slow down long enough to listen. I thought about how many moments are lost not to cruelty, but to certainty. How many gestures are abandoned not because they are wrong, but because they are risky. And I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not let fear dictate my tenderness. I would not let ideology outpace empathy. And I would not allow gratitude to become a private thought when it deserved to be spoken aloud. Because love that survives decades deserves witnesses, not judges. And if the world has become uncomfortable with that idea, then perhaps discomfort is not the enemy we've been taught to fear. The real change announced itself without ceremony. No one called it growth. No one labeled it progress. It simply showed up in the way things stopped escalating. At the next family gathering, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. My granddaughter was quieter, but not withdrawn. She listened more than she spoke. When a conversation brushed against one of those familiar pressure points, she didn't jump in immediately. She waited. Sometimes she let the moment pass entirely. That restraint spoke louder than any apology could have. I watched her interact with my wife in small, ordinary ways, asking her opinion, laughing at her stories, letting her finish her sentences without interruption. These weren't grand gestures. They were corrections made in silence. And that told me something important. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to understand. One afternoon, months after the birthday, the three of us found ourselves walking together through a park. It was one of those slow days where conversation drifts naturally, without agenda. Leaves crunched underfoot. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. The world felt briefly uncomplicated. My wife stopped to admire a small flower bed near a bench. She bent slightly, squinting at the colors, commenting on how carefully it had been arranged. I stood beside her, listening. Without thinking, I said, "You've always noticed details other people miss." She smiled, pleased. From the corner of my eye, I saw my granddaughter tense, just slightly. Then she relaxed. She didn't say anything. That moment mattered more to me than she probably realized. It told me she was learning to separate admiration from domination, appreciation from appropriation, that she was beginning to understand something that takes many people a lifetime to grasp. Intention and impact are not enemies. They are partners. One without the other distorts reality. Later, as we sat on a bench, my granddaughter surprised me. "I've been thinking about why I reacted the way I did at Grandma's birthday," she said. "I waited. I think part of it was fear," she admitted. "Fear that if I don't speak up, I'm complicit. Fear that silence means approval. And what do you think now? I asked. She stared ahead for a moment. I think silence can also mean listening. And listening doesn't mean surrendering your values. I nodded. That's a hard distinction to learn. She smiled faintly. It really is. She turned to me then, her expression serious but calm. I don't want to be someone who hurts people in the name of protecting them. I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, but respect. That awareness, I said, will take you further than certainty ever could. She didn't argue. She didn't qualify it. She simply absorbed it. That night, after my wife and I returned home, she sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting on my knee. "You didn't stop being you," she said softly. "No," I replied. "But I almost did." She squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you didn't." So was I. Because I realized something crucial in those months after the birthday. The conflict hadn't been about a toast. It had been about permission. About who gets to speak, who gets to define meaning, and who is allowed to express love without being interrogated for it. And what we had slowly reclaimed was not agreement, but humanity. My granddaughter still believes strongly in many of the things she believed before. I still disagree with some of them. But now, those beliefs sit beside people instead of replacing them. They no longer flatten moments that require care. And that makes all the difference. I've learned that families don't fracture because of disagreement alone. They fracture when certainty outruns compassion. When correction replaces curiosity. When speaking over becomes mistaken for speaking up. Watching my granddaughter learn to pause, to look first, to listen, reminded me that change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the space between reaction and restraint. And that quiet space is where respect is rebuilt. Not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. I still think about that birthday. Not because it ended badly, but because it showed me how easily meaning can be taken away from the people who actually live it. A single sentence, spoken with certainty, was enough to freeze a room, to interrupt a lifetime of shared language between two people, to turn gratitude into something suspicious. And yet, that moment didn't destroy us. It revealed us. It revealed how fragile public affection has become in a world that rushes to interpret before it listens. How quickly intention is dismissed when it doesn't align with a pre-approved framework. How easily people are reduced to roles instead of being seen as individuals shaped by history, context, and choice. I didn't stop wanting to honor my wife that night. I stopped because the moment was taken from us. That distinction matters. Over time, I realized something uncomfortable but necessary. The real danger was never my granddaughter's beliefs. It was the speed at which those beliefs were applied. Without curiosity, without consent, without regard for the people standing right in front of her. And I also had to face my own mistake. I nearly allowed that moment to teach me silence. I nearly accepted the idea that my voice, especially when expressing admiration, gratitude, or love, was something that needed justification. That standing up to honor the woman I love could be interpreted as selfishness simply because I was the one speaking. That kind of thinking corrodes relationships quietly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It simply convinces you to shrink. I'm grateful I didn't. Not because I wanted to win an argument. Not because I needed to be right. But because my wife deserved to be honored without my hesitation becoming the price. And she never asked me to be quieter. She never asked me to disappear. What she asked for, what she has always asked for, was honesty, presence. The same man she married, speaking the same language of care he always had. My granddaughter learned something too. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But genuinely. She learned that protection without listening becomes control. That speaking for someone who never asked you to is its own form of erasure. That good intentions can still wound when they move faster than empathy. She didn't abandon her values. She learned how to carry them with more care. And I learned that boundaries don't always look like confrontation. Sometimes they look like refusing to internalize shame that was never yours to carry. Sometimes they look like continuing to show love calmly, without apology, until the noise around it quiets down. Today, I still speak up. I still express gratitude. I still honor my wife, publicly and privately. But I do it with a deeper awareness now. Not fear. Awareness. Awareness that love doesn't need an audience, but it also shouldn't be forced into silence. Awareness that moments belong to the people living them, not the people interpreting them from the outside. If there's one thing I hope people understand from this story, it's this. Celebrating someone you love is not taking something away from them. Speaking with gratitude is not stealing space. And admiration, when it's mutual and welcomed, is not ego. So let me ask you something. Honestly, without labels or slogans, have you ever tried to honor someone you love, only to be told you were making it about yourself? And when that happened, did you stay silent, or did you find a way to stay true to who you are? I'd really like to hear your thoughts.